The elevator ride to the 39th floor felt longer than usual. I stood alone, gripping a slim manila envelope and the small black notebook that had never left my desk drawer in 12 years. The soft hum of the elevator masked the sound of my heart pounding, not with fear, but with finality. This was no longer a decision. It was the beginning of something I had planned for far too long. When the doors slid open, I stepped into the executive wing of Voltreon Systems. Glass walls, polished concrete, and air that always smelled faintly of cedar and money. Landon Crane's office was at the far end, corner view. Of course. He didn't look up as I entered. He was scrolling through something on his tablet, espresso steaming beside him. "Marin," he said, without warmth. "What's on fire this morning?" I said nothing. I walked up to his desk and placed the envelope down in front of him. He raised an eyebrow, then picked it up, tearing it open with one fluid motion. His eyes scanned the letter, and after a few seconds, he chuckled. Then he laughed, loudly. "You're serious? You're actually quitting?" He leaned back in his chair, grinning. "At your age? In this industry? Good luck." His laughter echoed off the glass walls. His espresso mug rattled slightly as he tapped the table. "Honestly, I thought you were a lifer, quiet, reliable, like an old Swiss Army knife. Not exactly CTO material, though, right?" Outside his office, I could see his assistant glance toward the glass. Landon raised his voice just enough. "Hey, Jenna, Marin's quitting. Should we let her keep her stapler as a parting gift?" I said nothing. He waved dismissively. 12 years of support work is impressive, but let's be real. Innovation? That takes vision. That takes guts. I looked at him. Calm, controlled. "There's a second document in the envelope." His grin faltered. He pulled it out, flipping it over. It was a printed policy document. Section 7. 3. Employee-created development archives and IP ownership. Highlighted in yellow. At the bottom, his digital signature, March 4th, 2020. "You signed that 3 years ago," I said, "right before the compliance audit." He blinked, lips tightening. "That's not meant for senior engineers." I picked up my notebook and turned to leave. "You just called me support staff," I said, pausing at the door. "In 3 weeks, you'll wish I had stayed." The elevator opened again, and this time, I smiled. He laughed like it was nothing, but what stayed with me longer than his arrogance was the echo of something worse. I used to believe in that man. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car on the 3rd floor of the parking garage. Engine off, windows cracked. The manila envelope rested on the passenger seat, but my hand reached for the old black notebook in my bag. I hadn't opened it in years. On the very first page, written in neat handwriting, was the line, "Offer received, MIT PhD, Engineering Systems, Full Fellowship, Decision due, March 15th, 6 years ago." I had been offered a fully funded doctoral position at MIT, a place I'd dreamed of since undergrad. I had printed out the offer letter and taped it to my fridge at the time. It felt like I had finally made it. Then I told Landon. He called me into his office within hours. At that point, he was still Vice President of Innovation, slick, charming, a little too polished, but always convincing. I remember sitting across from him as he spun his version of reality. "MIT is great," he said, "but you're already shaping the future here. You're not a student. Marin, you're a leader." I tried to stay neutral, but he kept going. "If you stay, I'll make sure you're chief engineer within 12 months. You'll lead every core project. Your name will be on patents, models, internal credits, everything. No ivory towers, just real-world impact." I hadn't realized how much I wanted that until he said it out loud. To be seen, to be trusted, to finally be visible. I turned MIT down the next week. I believed I was choosing relevance over reputation, that I was trading titles for influence, and for a little while, it even seemed like I'd made the right call. I led the design of Voltrion's predictive energy routing systems and created a dynamic optimization model that became the backbone of the company's platform. I remember one specific night. The system kept failing under peak load. Everyone else had gone home, but I stayed. I finally found the flaw around 2:12 a.m. I slept in the break room, using my hoodie as a pillow, just to push the fix before the 6 o'clock a.m. system update. I didn't need applause, but I believed recognition would come. It never did. And then came the moment that finally broke that belief. 2 months before I handed in my resignation, Voltrion hosted a virtual roundtable with press, analysts, and investors. I wasn't presenting, just running background technical checks, but I stayed logged in out of habit. The moderator introduced the final speaker, Landon Crane. His topic? The evolution of predictive energy routing. I braced myself for marketing fluff, but nothing prepared me for what he said next. I personally developed the breakthrough routing model over the course of 3 intense years, he said. It was the turning point for our entire optimization strategy. My chest tightened. There was no hesitation in his voice, no qualification, just full, unshakable confidence in a lie. I stared at the screen. That model had taken me 18 months of testing, failing, revising, and rebuilding. I had built every part of it, line by line, simulation by simulation. One of the new engineers beside me turned her head slightly. "Didn't you design that system?" she whispered. I nodded once, eyes still on the screen. Later that night, back at my desk, I opened a private folder I hadn't touched in months. Archive, me, private. Inside were annotated diagrams, voice memos, version logs, and sketches dating back years. All of it time-stamped, archived, and backed up. I clicked on a recording from 2:12 a.m., the night I had fixed the peak load failure. My voice, tired but clear. Resolved energy handoff lag by rebuilding the convergence logic. Will test against new load simulation at 7 a.m. I closed the file. It wasn't just that he'd stolen credit. It was that he had rewritten the past so confidently, so completely. I started questioning if I had ever mattered. Before leaving, I opened the MIT offer email, still there, buried in a folder titled "What If?" Then I read the message I'd sent 6 years ago. I believe the work I'm doing here is just as important. I closed my laptop, hands steady now. I had believed in him, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. He hadn't just lied to investors. He'd done it so confidently, so thoroughly, it made me doubt my own memory. Back at my apartment, I sat on the couch in the dark, laptop on my knees. The city outside buzzed with a soft, forgettable rhythm, but inside, my head was thudding with things I'd let slide for too long. I clicked open a folder I hadn't touched since before the holiday break. Archive Me Private. I had created it as a safety net, telling myself it was for version control and personal learning. But the truth? I kept those files because something in me always knew no one else would remember. The screen lit up with dozens of subfolders: design blueprints, algorithm versions, deployment notes, email chains, voice memos. I opened the earliest one dated from 5.5 years ago. The file name read, Adaptive Routing V0 Initial Thoughts.txt. In it, I'd written a note to myself, concept sketch, decentralized load balancing via feedback loop. Landon says it's too complex. Prove him wrong. I kept clicking, versions marked by date, time, and detail. Each file was carefully labeled. Most included internal emails I had sent to Landon with technical explanations, proposals, or architecture diagrams. And I had the receipts, timestamps, draft versions, attached visuals, all of it. I opened one voice memo from 2:30 a.m. on a stormy Thursday. My own voice echoed through the speakers, weary but focused. Testing cross-grid redundancy. Energy drop detected. Will rebuild predictive loop. Deployment scheduled for 7 o'clock a.m. I paused. That fix had saved the entire Western region's testbed from collapsing under heat surge demand. Landon had sent out a company-wide email later that day, congratulating the team, but no one ever asked who'd stayed behind to build the fix. No one knew, except him. I scrolled further until I noticed an unread email sitting in my inbox. Time-stamped 8:46 p.m., marked high priority. It was from one of the executive assistants I vaguely remembered, Sasha something. Subject line, review copy, do not distribute. Attachment, the mind behind Voltron, draft v3.pdf. My stomach turned. I wasn't supposed to be on that list. Curious. I opened the file. A sleek, modern cover appeared on my screen. Below the title, by Landon Crane. The preface began, "From sketching systems by hand to launching the most sophisticated optimization models in the industry. This is the story of how I engineered the future." I scrolled, breath tightening. Chapter 2. The Night I Rebuilt the Routing Core. Chapter 5. 18 months of silence. My journey through the model that changed everything. My hands hovered over the trackpad. I scanned paragraph after paragraph. And it was unmistakable. He was describing my work, my algorithms, my breakthroughs, the specific phrasing, the flow logic, the bottlenecks I had solved at 2:12 a.m. while eating cold pretzels at my desk. There was even a graphic, copied directly from a whiteboard photo I had emailed him during our first optimization round. He hadn't just erased me. He had repackaged me. I closed the document slowly and stared at the screen. Chest hollow and buzzing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about credit lost in a group effort. It was a calculated rewrite, a professional identity theft, wrapped in glossy self-promotion. He was writing a book about his genius, built on the scaffolding of my labor, and he had every intention of publishing it before the world ever knew who I was. I reopened the archive folder and created a new directory. Evidence. Level 1, I started copying files, voice memos, email threads, graphs, even the internal project nicknames only I had used. I'd kept it all, silently, faithfully, like a ghost documenting her own haunting, but no more. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the back. Tucked between the last 2 pages was an old business card. Matte black, silver foil. The name stood out like a memory I hadn't dared act on. Dr. Lenora Klein, CTO, Heliodyne Innovations. She had approached me once, 3 years ago, quietly, during a conference break. "When you're ready to work somewhere that actually understands what you do," she'd said, "call me." That night, I composed a message. Subject, still interested? Body, you once asked about the mind behind the algorithm. If the offer still stands, I'd like to talk. I hovered a moment, then clicked send. Landon was writing a myth. I was about to start the chapter where it all falls apart. I sent the email expecting a polite decline. What I got instead was an invitation, same day. No hesitation. Lenora Klein replied just before 7:15 a.m. The message was brief and precise. "Let's talk. 11 o'clock a.m. Private conference room, Heliodyne HQ." By 10:40 a.m., I was standing in front of the sleek, brushed steel doors of Heliodyne Innovations. Unlike Voltron's lobby, full of marble, awards, and polished portraits, this place was built around silence, code, and quiet brilliance, the kind of space where ideas mattered more than optics. The receptionist gave me a visitor badge without small talk and motioned me to a side hallway. Lenora was waiting just outside a glass-walled conference room, dressed in a dark blazer, no jewelry, hair pulled back tight. She didn't smile, didn't posture, just nodded once. "You came fast," she said. "I've been quiet for too long." I replied. She held the door for me, then closed it behind us. No assistance, no distractions, just two women in a room that felt refreshingly absent of pretense. Lenora didn't ask for a recap. She didn't need one. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up a single file. Before she clicked play, she said, "I remember the way you diagrammed that routing core. You didn't just write code. You rewired how this industry thinks." Her words caught me off guard, not because they were flattering, but because they felt like the truth. No translation, no caveat. I slid a small USB drive across the table. Voice logs, diagrams, code iterations, email threads, all time-stamped. She plugged it in without ceremony. For the next several minutes, she read, clicked, and scrolled. Quiet, focused, methodical. When she finally looked up, she said, "You've got everything you need to challenge the patents." I nodded. I didn't build this archive because I expected to use it. I built it because I knew no one else would. Lenora leaned back slightly, then said something that changed everything. "I want to show you something." She opened a new file, a PowerPoint slide deck with a Voltron header. The title page read, Project Vesta, Q4 Launch Plan, below it. Confidential, internal only, I frowned. She clicked to slide 4. It was a schematic of an advanced routing model, multi-layered, adaptive, regionally scaled. And it was mine, not inspired by mine, not similar, mine, 3 years ago. I'd built that model in my own time, in a side notebook I'd never submitted. I hadn't even finished stress testing it. "They're preparing to launch it this fall," Lenora said. "Someone inside sent this to me last night." For a moment, I didn't breathe. "They weren't just stealing my past," I said quietly. "They were preparing to steal my future." Lenora didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time you take it back." She paused, then offered the one thing no one at Voltron had ever given me. "Come to Heliodyne, full authority. Build your system the way it was meant to work. And when you're ready, my legal team will help you burn down every lie they've built." For the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel like I had to fight to prove I mattered. I looked her in the eye and said, "Yes." The alliance had begun, after I said yes to Lenora. I thought the next call would be one of strategy. Instead, it was a cease and desist. The email came through at 9:00 a.m., less than 24 hours after I'd accepted the offer from Heliodyne. The subject line screamed in all caps, "Immediate legal notice. Unauthorized disclosure of proprietary systems." I didn't flinch. I clicked it open, sipped my coffee, and read each line slowly. Voltron's legal department, apparently outraged, was accusing me of stealing confidential IP and misrepresenting ownership of proprietary routing frameworks. There was something almost comical about the tone, like someone trying very hard to sound powerful from a position of panic. It was long, bloated with legal jargon, and made vague threats about consequences if I continued to leverage or display any derivative works developed within Voltron systems. I leaned back, opened a second window, and pulled up a familiar PDF. Internal Policy Handbook, Revenues, 2020. Section 7.3, Intellectual Ownership of Development Archives. I'd written that policy myself 3 years ago during a messy internal audit. At the time, the company wanted to clean up documentation practices, and I had fought hard to include a clause protecting non-billable, self-directed innovation. It had been signed, without question, by Landon Crane. I composed a reply. Please refer to Section 7.3 of the Internal Policy Handbook. Documentation and systems created by employees during non-billable research or self-directed innovation shall remain their intellectual property unless a separate agreement has been signed. You signed this clause on March 4, 2020. No further clarification needed. I attached a screenshot of the policy and the signature page. No emotional language. No need. At 10:20 a.m., I received a Slack ping from Lenora. Got the notice too. Voltron's flailing. Legal team's not impressed. We're drafting a response. She added a smile emoji. Just one. By 2:30 p.m., I was reviewing design files in my temporary workspace when another message came in. This one was unexpected. Unmarked number, no subject, no greeting, just one sentence. They're trying to bury this, but you have a case. Check the version logs from Q2 last year. Below that, an email signature. Jason P., Internal Counsel. Voltron Systems, former. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I simply sat up straighter and opened my backup drive. In a folder titled Q2 Logs, I found it. Proof of authorship. A commit record from 10:21 a.m. April 17th. Time-stamped under my personal credentials. Attaching the routing core schematic Voltron was now trying to claim as theirs. Jason had been part of the policy team when Section 7.3 was drafted. He knew exactly what was in it, and now, he was telling me they were altering internal logs to overwrite my name. They couldn't beat me with facts, I thought, so now they're rewriting history. I forwarded the file to Lenora with a short note. We have confirmation, time to act. She responded within 5 minutes. We move tomorrow, you're not alone. I closed my laptop, folded my hands, and stared out the window at the late afternoon skyline. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching longer, but I'd never seen things so clearly. They wanted a quiet exit, but I wasn't leaving quietly anymore. It didn't take long. 6 days after the cease and desist, the first cracks appeared. I was reviewing architecture diagrams for Heliodyne's new adaptive model when a message came through from an unlisted number. It was a screenshot, low resolution, cropped in haste, but I knew what I was looking at immediately. A Voltron control panel. Red text blinked at the top. Error, demand forecast, inconsistent with regional load balancer output. Timestamp, 8:50 a.m. system, region 2, Midwest Energy Corridor, no sender, no explanation, just the image. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly. They'd started to lose the thread. At first, I thought it was a fluke, a reporting lag. But by 10 o'clock a.m., 2 more screenshots came in, this time with attached performance logs. The patterns were clear. Predicted demand curves no longer aligned with actual usage. Load balancing fell behind, failing to adapt to the new solar surge windows and nightly urban consumption drop-offs. In simple terms, the system was guessing, and guessing wrong. That afternoon, I heard from someone I hadn't spoken to in months, Jonas, a back-end engineer still clinging to Voltron's middle tier. He didn't say much, just one line. Marin, were you the one who built the heartbeat module? I blinked. Heartbeat? That's what they were calling it? Because it's missing. I sat up straighter. Missing wasn't something you said lightly in an operational dashboard. Modules might misfire, get overwritten, glitch during a push. But missing? I asked for a screenshot. Jonas hesitated, then sent it. The error was even more specific this time. Fatal error. Missing core logic module. immerses opt v3.9. There it was. My name, still in the code, still alive, 3 years ago. I'd added that tag as a quiet joke. immerses opt stood for Marin-Hollis Optimization, version 3.9, the stable build of the dynamic load prediction model I'd created after 6 months of trial and error. It had been tucked deep in the system, hidden behind layers of abstraction and renaming conventions, but it was the engine, the silent heartbeat that allowed the entire predictive routing framework to run ahead of demand curves, not behind them. They had scrubbed my name from documentation, rewrote internal credits, rebranded functions, but they never touched the core, because they never understood it. I remembered the night I finalized version 3.9, 2:12 a.m., raining outside. I'd been alone in the office, eating trail mix for dinner, rerunning the same load spike test for the 10th time. When it finally passed, with zero fallback activation, I saved the file under that tag, mhollis opt v3.9. I didn't think anyone would ever see it. Now it was blinking across their error reports. By 3:00 p.m., I had confirmation from another source. Voltron had entered emergency protocol mode for 3 regions. All systems were in override fallback, running blind without predictive logic. No one on the current team had access to the module, not because it was encrypted, but because no one ever asked how it worked. Someone tried to call me. Internal line, Voltron switchboard. I let it ring. Then came the text. Can we talk? System's down. No one knows how to fix this. I stared at it, then muted my phone. Later, I sat with Lenora in her office. She'd seen the same reports. Heliodyne had picked up the system behavior through public grid monitoring tools. Our models had already outpaced what Voltron's platform could deliver. They'll either admit they can't fix it, I said quietly, or pretend nothing's wrong. Either way, Lenora replied. We don't chase, we build. Their collapse will speak louder than anything we say. I nodded. For 12 years. I had been the invisible architect, the silent mind that kept everything running. Now, with no press release, no lawsuit, and no confrontation, the truth was surfacing on its own, and I didn't need to say a word. When your name vanishes from the logs, but not from the room, there's a shift you can't buy back. 1 week after the system failures began, Landon took the stage at the Global Smart Systems Conference in Boston. It was a keynote he had locked in months prior, back when Voltron's routing framework was still the darling of the industry, back when people still believed he was the architect behind it. I hadn't planned to attend, but then an invitation arrived in my inbox. The conference committee had quietly extended a guest pass to me, in appreciation of your foundational contributions to predictive infrastructure development. There was no panel, no speech, just a reserved seat, center left, 4th row, anonymous, but deliberate. I took it, from my chair. I watched Landon step into the spotlight beneath the towering screen. He wore the usual polished navy suit, the kind with subtle stripes you only notice under stage lights. His smile was rehearsed, but his eyes scanned the crowd like he was searching for a lifeline. The title behind him read, Next-Gen Predictive Infrastructure, Building for Tomorrow. He began speaking, smooth cadence, clean posture, just enough animation to seem relaxed. He talked about energy resilience, demand volatility, global scaling. He used all the right buzzwords, but I could hear it, the hollowness. For 12 years. I had written those words, crafted those metaphors, designed the storyboards, and built the technical underpinnings so he could stand in front of people and make sense. Now, stripped of that, he was reciting phrases without weight. A few heads tilted in the rows ahead of me. One man whispered to his colleague, Is he just repeating last year's speech? Another leaned forward, scanning the slides. Where's the framework detail? There's nothing here. At 11:15 a.m., the moderator opened the floor for Q&A. Silence held for a moment. Then a young woman stood in the 3rd row. Her conference badge read, Engineering Fellow, University of Chicago. She cleared her throat. Mr. Crane, wasn't this algorithm originally built by your chief engineer, Hollis? The entire auditorium stilled. For the first time, Landon blinked. He began. Voice momentarily clipped. Myron was part of a larger team. I led the architectural design. From the front row, someone muttered, Pretty sure her name's still in the 3.9 commit log. Huh? Another voice. She presented it at the closed-door MIT summit 2 years ago. I was there. Landon's mouth opened, but no sound followed. I didn't move. I didn't smile. But inside, something settled. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pride. It was balance. He tried to recover with a redirect, more vague terms about collaborative innovation and collective breakthroughs. But the room had already turned. What was once polite attention became a quiet tide of questioning glances and shifting posture. The next question came from a researcher at a German energy institute. Could you walk us through how your system handles dynamic constraint stacking across microregions? Landon froze. We, optimize layering strategies for real-time adaptability. It didn't answer the question, and the researcher didn't press. He just nodded, unimpressed, and sat down. By the fourth question, the rhythm had collapsed completely. People were checking their watches. Someone in the back row yawned. A few left discreetly through the side doors. I glanced at the schedule printed in the program book. The next session? Ethical Attribution in Engineering Leadership. I stood before Landon finished. As I slipped out the side aisle, I heard the moderator thanking him. The applause that followed was polite, scattered, and brief. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking, phone buzzing in my bag with unread messages I didn't need to check yet. For once. The world didn't need me to explain who I was. They were starting to remember. I left that conference hall with applause still echoing in my ears. Not for Landon. Of course. But for the silence that followed his collapse. It was poetic. But applause doesn't rewrite patents. It doesn't put your name back on what you built. For that, I needed proof and signatures. 2 days later, I was sitting across from Lenora in Heliodine's legal war room. The walls were lined with whiteboards scribbled with dates, code versions, and filing numbers. Their lead patent counsel, Dana Kessler, clicked through a file directory projected on a massive screen while another lawyer typed furiously at a corner desk. Before we even draft a formal challenge, Dana began, we need to prove 3 things. 1. You created the work before their patent was filed. 2. It was novel. And 3. It had real application potential. I've got the comment logs, I said, already opening my laptop. Time-stamped, tied to personal development environments. I also have 6 emails where I explained the optimization framework to Landon, including diagrams. Show me the one with the phase-shifting routing logic, she said. I did. As Dana reviewed the files, I watched her expression shift from neutral to intent focus. Then she leaned back. You weren't kidding. This is strong. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. That afternoon, Lenora called in an old contact from Stanford's Tech Verification Unit to assist with validating the source timeline. We needed more than code. We needed irrefutable origin evidence, something that couldn't be faked, recompiled, or edited after the fact. I might have something, I said slowly, opening an old cardboard storage box I hadn't touched in over 2 years. Inside were a few of my notebooks from the Voltron days. Real, paper notebooks. Most were filled with sketchy notes, half-baked ideas, flow diagrams. But in one, spiral-bound with a faded cover, I found a page that made me stop breathing. Dated 4 years earlier, in my own handwriting, was a full-page schematic labeled Handoff Correction V2, Adaptive Load Balancing with Root Convergence Windows. Below it, a signature, M. Hollis, and the timestamp 3:12 p.m., marked in the margin. I forgot I even signed this, I whispered. Lenora looked over my shoulder. Her eyes widened. You drew this before they filed anything. This exact structure made it into their core system. We submitted the page to Dr. Marlowe, the third-party verification specialist. He ran forensic analysis on the ink, pressure patterns, paper type, and date alignment. 48 hours later, the report came back. Authentic, unaltered, unmistakably yours. The legal team updated our internal case notes. Dana called a private strategy session at 10:00 a.m. the following morning. We go forward with a formal prior art challenge, she declared. Filed with the U.S. Patent Office by end of week. If they push back, we're prepared to take this public. No one wants their name on fraudulent IP filings. I sat back in my chair, absorbing it all, not as a victim anymore, but as the inventor, as the author reclaiming her work. You realize what this means, right? Lenora asked after the lawyers cleared the room. I do, I said, my voice steady. It means I finally stopped being a ghost in someone else's narrative. She smiled. Let's burn the whole chapter down. By 3:00 p.m., the paperwork was submitted. The title line read, Inventor, Marian Hollis. Claim, prior authorship of algorithmic system, referenced in Voltron patent 8820391B. Attached were scanned commit logs, original email correspondences, early technical sketches, and the now verified schematic with my signature. I stared at the final confirmation screen, then clicked Submit. A simple motion, but it carried 12 years of silence behind it. Later that night, I stood in my apartment, watching the skyline flicker in the distance. Phone in hand, heart beating faster than usual. I wasn't waiting for Landon to respond. I wasn't scared of Voltron's legal team. I was waiting for something deeper. The moment my name finally stood beside the things I had built. Not as a footnote, not as a buried contributor, but as the origin. And this time, the proof was written in black ink, across a page that had never belonged to anyone else but me. The email came through at 7:43 a.m., just as the sun was cutting harsh lines across the conference table at Heliodine. I was sipping my second cup of black coffee, no sugar, no distractions, when the subject line landed in bold. RE, Patent Dispute Coverage, Tech Circuit Daily. Lenora slid her tablet toward me without a word. On the screen was the headline, Voltron's algorithmic patents under fire, insider claims misattribution. There were no cheers, no smirks, just a heavy, electric stillness in the room. This wasn't a victory yet. It was a match being struck in a room full of kindling. I read each line with a calculated calm. The article outlined my formal patent challenge, filed only days earlier. It cross-referenced timestamps, internal memos, and pointedly noted the peculiar timing of Voltron's patent filings, many of which occurred suspiciously close to presentations I had led as internal briefings. One paragraph quoted a source close to the matter saying, "The name on the paperwork isn't always the name who wrote the code." Outside, the city hummed as usual, but inside that room, it felt like gravity had shifted, just slightly, just enough. Then the dominoes began to fall. Tech forums lit up by 9:00 a.m., with engineers and researchers dissecting every patent linked to Voltron's energy optimization models. Comments poured in. Wait, wasn't Marian Hollis the engineer behind the MH grid path system? I worked there 3 years ago. She ran all the review meetings. Landon barely spoke. And then came the message that made me pause. An email from Gavin Marks. Subject: I think it's time. I hadn't heard that name in years. Gavin had been one of the original optimization leads back when Voltron was still a messy little startup with dreams too big for its codebase. He was quiet, methodical, and brilliant, just the kind of engineer Landon never knew how to manage. In his message, Gavin wrote, 5 years ago, I was pressured to refile one of my core patents, M. Hollis Opt v1.2. They asked me to switch the name on the submission to reflect executive alignment. I still have the original with both our names on it. Yours first. They made me erase you, Myron. I haven't slept well since. The attachment was there, a scan of the original application, time-stamped, with our signatures, mine in black ink, Gavin's in blue. It felt like looking into a mirror I didn't know had been covered for years. I forwarded the file to Heliodine's legal team immediately. Their reply came within minutes. This changes everything. We'll get it notarized and included in the case file by this afternoon. Lenora leaned back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. That's the first thread, she murmured. Pull it, and the whole thing unravels. I thought of the silence Landon always kept me in, how I'd been his ghostwriter, his shadow genius, how many others had been rewritten the same way. I wasn't alone. That realization didn't comfort me, it focused me, because if they could erase my name, they could erase anyone's. Gavin's voice was just the first echo. More would come. Quiet builders, pushed aside, buried brilliance. At 10:30 a.m., another article hit. Engineering Ledger published an exposé detailing how Voltron had restructured its R&D at key patent milestones, coinciding suspiciously with sudden executive-led innovations. By noon, hashtags had begun trending. Who built Voltron credit? The engineer Hollis was first. I didn't respond. I didn't repost. I didn't smile. But I did open a fresh folder on my desktop. I labeled it Restoration. And I got to work. The headlines hadn't stopped for days. Voltron's innovation under fire. Key patents may be contested. Former engineers speak out. Each article chipped away at the empire Landon Crane had so carefully curated with my work. And yet, as the Blacktown car pulled up in front of the Grand Pinnacle Convention Center, I felt no joy, no vengeance, just a cold, crystalline calm. I was here to speak, not to settle scores. As the driver opened the door, my phone vibrated in my hand. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut said I'd recognize the voice. I answered, and there it was, worn thin and trembling on the other end. Marin, it's me. I didn't reply. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but please, I need your help. Landon Crane, the same man who once laughed in my face at 6:00 a.m., told me I was too old for tech, and rebranded my entire body of work under his own name, was now calling me on the morning of the biggest technical conference of the year, sounding like a man 3 minutes from collapse. I'm speaking at noon, he said, voice cracking. They expect a detailed presentation on the adaptive grid model. The slides, half of them don't make sense. I can't answer questions about the core structure. I can't even explain the convergence cycle. There was a long pause. You were always the one who made me sound credible. If you could just send me a few talking points, even just one of your diagrams. Marin, I'm begging you. I looked out the tinted window, just across the plaza. The banners for the International Energy Systems Summit were waving in the breeze. The marquee above the conference center doors read, Opening Keynote, Marin Hollis, CTO, Heliodyne Innovations, Reinventing Adaptive Energy Models. Below that, in smaller letters, Guest Panelist, Landon Crane, Voltron Corp. It was quiet in the car. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. The driver waited without looking at me. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse didn't spike. I'd spent too many years waiting to feel this level of stillness. I remembered another time, 3 years ago, after I'd completed version 3.8 of the optimization framework. Landon had leaned into my cubicle and said, You know, you're the engine, Marin. I'm just the face. I'd smiled back then, foolishly, because the very next day, a patent application had been filed, his name at the top, mine buried in the acknowledgments. Now, he was back to ask for help on work he never understood, and I was finally done being the engine for someone else's vehicle. I'm sorry, Landon, I said quietly, but I have my own presentation to prepare for. Marin, please, I know I messed up, but this will destroy me. Maybe you should have thought of that before signing your name over my algorithms. There was silence again, but this time, it wasn't mine to own. I hung up. As I stepped out of the car, a conference aide approached with a headset and a clipboard. Ms. Hollis, welcome. Your green room is ready. You're first on the main stage. Thank you, I said, following her through the double doors. just before we turned the corner into the speaker prep area. Another staffer jogged up with a revised printout of the program. "We've made one last update," she said. "Mr. Crane's role has been shifted." I looked down. Panel guest only. No presentation slot. Scheduled status. Pending availability. I smiled, not out of cruelty, but clarity. This wasn't vengeance. It was gravity pulling false things apart. Inside the green room, Lenora was waiting, a cup of coffee in each hand. "He called you, didn't he?" "He did. Did you give him anything?" I shook my head. "No, I don't do ghostwriting anymore." Lenora raised her cup in a silent toast. "Then let's get you mic'd up. It's your voice the world's finally ready to hear." And for the first time in 12 years, I walked toward the stage, knowing that every word I spoke would be mine. The roar of the audience faded behind the curtain as I stood still, centered, waiting. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. Not anymore. Not after 12 years of silence. Behind me, the screen displayed my name in bold white text. Keynote speaker, Marin Hollis, CTO, Heliodyne Innovations. I took one step forward, then another. The stage lights warmed my skin as I emerged into full view. The applause rising, steady but respectful. I walked to the center, stopped at the podium, and looked out into the sea of faces. Engineers, researchers, executives, and in the second row, Landon Crane, barely blinking. I didn't rush. I let the silence settle, not as a pause, but as a claim. 12 years ago, I began. I designed a routing framework in a basement lab with secondhand processors and not enough funding for real-time testing. Everyone said it was too early, too ambitious, too theoretical. A few nods, some eyes widened. They didn't know yet where I was going, but they were listening. "But what if theory isn't ahead of time?" I asked. "What if it's time that needs to catch up?" With a click of the remote in my hand, the screen shifted. A dynamic simulation unfolded, a 3D topographic energy grid, adjusting in real time to simulated demand surges and terrain changes. "This," I said, "is the Hollis adaptive model, built on predictive terrain-aware distribution and decentralized logic. It learns, it shifts, it breathes." The audience leaned in. No one looked at their phones. "This model," I continued, "was dismissed as impractical until last year, when someone else began preparing it for launch under a different name." I paused, then pulled out a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of my blazer. "I'd like to read a short passage," I said. "It's from a draft of a book titled The Mind Behind Voltron." My voice stayed steady as I read. "Innovation is the product of clarity under pressure. The routing model we built was born from solitude, sleepless nights, and a mind that never stops iterating." I looked up. "He wrote that," I said, "but I lived it." A few people turned to Landon now. He sat stiffly, a single hand clenched in his lap. I continued. "This passage, word for word, was lifted from a notebook entry I wrote 4 years ago. A page I found, time-stamped, in my own handwriting, and the system he called his was built from algorithms I designed in silence, while his name appeared on the patents." I clicked again. The slide changed. A scan of the notebook appeared. My handwriting. The same passage, dated and authenticated. Gasps. Then murmurs. Then something shifted. Applause, slow, deliberate, undeniable, began from the back of the room. I let it happen. Let the noise rise. I didn't force it. I didn't need to. I stepped back from the mic and finished simply. "I'm not here to reclaim credit. I'm here to stop being invisible. This is the work. This is the truth. And this time, it has my name on it." I walked off stage before the applause peaked. I didn't need the ovation. In the wings, Lenora was waiting. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied, voice calm, light. "I finally said it out loud. The applause had long faded, the headlines had calmed, and for the first time in years, I was alone in my own office, with silence that didn't sting. It was 8:40 a.m. when I slid open the last drawer in my new workspace at Heliodyne. The morning light spilled across my desk, catching the edges of a thick, cream-colored envelope tucked neatly beneath a blueprint portfolio. No return address, but I didn't need one. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, slanted, too neat to be casual, too rigid to be warm. Landon. I held it for a second before opening it. There was no ceremony, just a folded letter, handwritten in black ink. A slight smudge on the bottom corner, like he'd hesitated before sealing it. Marin, I don't know if you'll ever read this. For 12 years, I presented your work and called it leadership. I've come to realize it was cowardice. The next paragraph was scratched out, then resumed. You did the building, I did the talking, somewhere along the way. I convinced myself that the face mattered more than the engine, but now I know the truth. Without you, there was never any fire in the machine. I read the final lines twice. I'm sorry, not just for what I took, but for making you feel like you had to stay quiet to be heard. That was it. No request, no plea for redemption. Just ink, finally admitting what truth had been screaming for years. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not in pain, but in peace. This wasn't closure because he asked for it. It was closure because I no longer needed it. I folded the letter, set it aside, and reached for the blueprint binder beneath it. Inside was something far more alive than any apology could offer. A new system, one I'd been quietly designing in parallel for nearly 6 months, built on real-time energy flow, environmental modeling, and AI-augmented forecasting. It wasn't a continuation of Voltrion's legacy. It was a breakaway. The first page bore a clean title block, project codename Hollis AI-001. I smiled. Tucked into the corner pocket of the folder was a post-it from Lenora. Board-approved Phase 1 funding. Let's build something they can't erase. I looked back at Landon's letter for a moment, then placed it gently in the drawer, beside the binder. Not to hide it, not to cherish it, but because every map needs its origin marked, especially when the journey ahead has no ceiling. The drawer clicked shut with a quiet finality. I stood and crossed to the window. The city stretched outward in quiet motion. Buses whirred, cyclists coasted by. Another day moved forward. My phone buzzed. Lenora. You still good for 2:00 p.m.? Launch timeline to review. I texted back. Wouldn't miss it. I took one last look around the office, not just at the tools and the plans, but at the space that felt, finally, like it had room for me in it. And as I turned off the desk light, the soft reflection on the drawer's metal handle caught my eye. It glowed faintly, nothing dramatic, just enough to remind me. The fire hadn't gone out. It had simply changed hands. This time, no one else would carry it for me, and no one else would need to.